But change is inevitable, but growth is optional. And I want to sort of frame out now what I'm going to say, because Judaism has flourished for thousands of years because when the inevitable changes happened, we were able to adapt and we were able to grow. Of course, the first big change that came was when we accepted the Torah at Har Sinai and we became something more than just a tribe. We actually became a nation. Then the next big change that occurred was when the Second Temple was destroyed. The rabbis at the time had to make a decision. Do they let Judaism die out as they knew it with the destruction of the temple, or do they rebrand? And they decided on the most audacious changes imaginable. They substituted prayer for sacrifice. So in other words, the sacrifices were gone, prayer is in, and they turned our Shabbat table into a substitute for the altar. Those, of course, who were not prepared to accept these changes, who were not prepared to grow, namely the Sadducees, because they were wedded to the temple and their roles as priests, what happened to them? They disappeared. The Pharisees instead took these external changes, the destruction of the temple's gone, and used it as an opportunity for growth when Judaism should have naturally died out because it was on the precipice. They rebranded for a new era without the vestiges of the past. They created new ways to express a new type of Judaism. They decided that they're going to create home rituals. You say, home rituals, what's that all about? Well, rituals that we take today for granted, they were the ones that created this, such as communal prayer. Communal prayer didn't exist before then. Shabbat candles, Kiddush, Passover Seder, Chanukah, Purim, Chuppah, meat and dairy dishes, the ketubah that we sign at a wedding, Havdalah, kosher slaughter, Kaddish. These were very, very new revolutionary ideas that the Jews before that didn't know about. Can you imagine, just put yourself right at the beginning of the new era, and you got Moshela. Moshela says to Yankala, all this new stuff, all these new ideas, nish famir, it's not for me. I'm just going to go and sit at the old temple site and cry and remember the good old days. That didn't happen. The rabbis responded to evolving moral sensibilities. The Torah tells us, you know what happens to a stubborn child? All you kids here that are sitting next to your parents, and get ready for this. Because the Torah tells us that a stubborn or rebellious child will be put to death. Yeah, that's what the Torah says. Be careful how you speak to your parents when you go home. Over 1,000 years after that was written in the Torah, the moral sensitivities of the time led rabbis to believe it was wrong. We should stop putting our kids to death. Not that we know that we ever did, but I mean, it's in the Torah. Our understanding of justice evolved. And so the rabbis effectively got rid of the commandment. And while they were at it, they effectively eliminated capital punishment. Yeah, it sort of doesn't go down too well when you start hanging people. And so they took that out as well. And they insisted that an eye for an eye is all about money. It's not about knocking somebody else's eye out, okay? So they changed that. And then you know what happened in the late 1700s? Many Jews found Judaism to be a pointless exercise in Talmudic hair splitting. The Baal Shem Tov, what did he do? He founded the Hasidic movement. And I'm not talking about like the Hasidim of today because it's not really the same. But he founded this movement that was a countermeasure to bring heart and to bring ecstatic being into place instead of prayer. In other words, he said, it comes from the heart, you sing and you dance and there's stories. That's what God wants from you. Don't worry about studying Talmud. He actually publicly said, you don't need to study Talmud, you don't need to study Mishnah. And you know what happened to him? He got run out of town. Really, I mean, you read the history. The Vilna Gaon literally ran him out of town, and they put a cherem on him. You know, they put an order on him that you shouldn't listen to him. But you know, it didn't help. And in the 1800s, Jews in Western Europe were freed from the ghettos. They were given the rights to citizenship. Jews developed, the Jewish world developed different denominations. And you know what denomination was the first denomination to be created? It was the Reform movement. The Reform movement was the first modern denomination. And you know what denomination came second? It was what they call Orthodox. Okay, that came as a pushback to the Reform movement. And then came along conservative Judaism. The different denominations represented different Jewish responses to the challenges of freedom and modernization. And you know what? We're still dealing with the challenge of freedom. In many ways, anti-Semitism is not the biggest problem in our community. And anybody tells you it is, really doesn't realize what the problem is. The fact is, a little anti-Semitism is actually healthy for the community. It brings the community closer together. Our problem today isn't that Gentiles hate us. It really isn't. It's that they love us. That's the problem. Now, I belong to a number of Christian groups on Facebook, and the things they say about us, wow, I feel so good when I come off the groups. When I listen to some of the Jewish groups, they're krechting and complaining about everything that's going on, and the Christian groups say how wonderful the Jews are, it's a machaya. But assimilation is the greatest challenge for the Jewish community. It sometimes feels like if present trends continue, 20 years from now, the only people who care about Judaism will be wearing black hats and payas and living in tight communities like Boisbriand, Outremont, Mesharim, and Israel. And the Jewish world seems to be splitting into those who are either strictly Orthodox and those who are secular and irreligious. Those of us, like you sitting here today, are part of what we call the great middle. Those who are neither strictly Orthodox nor completely secular or irreligious. We're here today, you and every one of you, you are here because we love a different type of Judaism. One that is respectful to tradition, that connects us to our ancestors and to Jews around the world. But one that at the same time engages with the modern world and evolves. A Judaism that seeks the right balance between tradition and change. But you know what? Our style of Judaism seems to be struggling. It seems to be struggling to stay relevant in the 21st century. Our membership rolls are aging. Our membership rolls are shrinking. We are failing to attract enough young people to complete our vision. Most young people today are assimilating into the secular culture. I mean, after all, let's be totally honest. Attending services in the metaverse from bed or on the couch is a heck of a lot better than sitting in the pews listening to the rabbi talking. At least if I'm going to listen, I might as well listen from my home. That's what they say. And the few that take Judaism seriously seem to migrate to neo-orthodoxy. Now, I say neo-orthodoxy because those who proudly pound their chests and consider themselves orthodox really have little idea of what it means to be truly orthodox. Orthodoxy is not about observance. I hear it all the time. Oh, he's so orthodox. You know, he keeps Shabbos, you know, and he only eats in kosher restaurants. Wow, he is so orthodox. I've got news for you. Orthodoxy is not about observance. That is what we call traditionally observant. Orthodoxy, just like Reform and Conservative, is based on theology, a belief, not an observance. Davening 3 times a day and eating glad kosher and only drinking chalav Yisrael and shuckling faster than your neighbor doesn't make you orthodox. It makes you observant. But that's for another sermon. How can we turn the shrinking numbers around? How can we compete against the attractions and low demands of secular life on the one hand, and the commitment to a strange form of neo-orthodoxy on the other? And I believe that the answer for us today is exactly the same answer that was for the Hasidim 200 years ago. And what the Hasidim brought forward at that time was 2 things. Actually, it was actually one thing when you think about it. They were concerned in ruach, spirit. We need to harness the God-given ruach and the spirit which exists inside all of us. And we need to use to make our Jewish lives more vibrant. We need to have more feeling, more emotion, more passion in our Jewish lives for Judaism in general. Because without that emotion, without that ruach, we merely practice our Judaism by rote. And we do it. Why do we do it? Because we become comfortable. This is what we do. We go to shul on Rosh Hashanah. And of course we have to leave by 12:30 because we've got 50 people coming for lunch. And of course we have to prepare. Not that anybody here would ever do that, God forbid. I'm talking about other shuls, you know. So we're comfortable. We do it because we don't know any better and because we don't want to even try. And if we live our Judaism in a rote way, we will certainly not set fire to the hearts of the next generation. This past year, I have had the opportunity to be a guest at different synagogues, both here and while traveling. And I cannot tell you the times that I walked away from those services so underwhelmed. Services that were totally uninspiring. And I said to myself, if that's what we're giving to the people, how do we expect the people to be inspired? And I reflected on it. I realized that the problem was not so much with the actual service, not so much with the actual officiants who were conducting those services, but the problem was more with me. You know, Rav Nachman of Breslov said that it's a great mitzvah to serve God with great joy, always. So how do we cultivate that joy? How do we make that joy contagious? Well, we can watch our Chazan. I mean, you just have to watch our Chazan. You can't help but feeling that magnetic aura from him. But you know what? It begins here. It begins in our mindset. Perhaps instead of saying, Good Yom Tov, which has an applied reference to the restrictions that go on with Yom Tov, we should perhaps say, a Gazunte Yom Tov or a Chag Sameach, happy holidays, because with the exception of Tisha B'Av, there is room for joy in all our Jewish holidays, without exception, except for Tisha B'Av. The true spirit of the holidays is not found in punctilious observance. We can observe the restrictions as much as you want. That doesn't give us ruach, doesn't give us joy. I have friends and colleagues who get lost in the minutiae of the interpretation of the observance that they never really enjoy the observance. They're so worried about, did they do it this way, did they do it that way? The true spirit of the holidays is found in the joyful celebration of the positive things that we are instructed to do, whether it's building a sukkah, having a seder, sharing a Shabbat, or a holiday, any holiday meal, eating cheesecake on Shavuot or whatever you like. If we enjoy doing something, we're going to want to do it more. If our children enjoy doing something, they will want to be part of their lives. Now, if I had to describe my Jewish ideology, my theology, it would be this. The Judaism which I advocate is a Judaism that seeks inclusiveness without judgment, authenticity and not guilt, and providing real solutions to the questions which confront us. Rather than being bound by ideological loyalty, which is a subject I'm going to address more on Kol Nidre. Let's not pretend for one iota that we strictly follow halakha, which was laid down hundreds of years ago. And let's not make halachic rules that we know the vast majority of the community won't follow. All those people who tell you, I am Orthodox, as they puff on a cigarette, they're not Orthodox, because an Orthodox person wouldn't puff on a cigarette. Why wouldn't an Orthodox person puff on a cigarette, or any other thing that they puff on? It's because it's forbidden in the Torah. The Torah does not allow you to do anything that will in any way hurt your body. So, rather than selective Judaism, which is what most people practice, we need to make halachic rules that the vast majority of the community can follow. Rather, let us recognize that although we are still guided and we are still governed by halakha, in other words, halakha should have a vote, but not a veto, because halakha was another creation of the rabbis in the 2nd century. Halakha must be adapted to meet today's realities. Let us put the spirit of the law above the letter of the law, whether that results in a leniency or in a stringency. So what do I mean by that? Well, technically, we're not supposed to use electronic devices on Shabbat. Not supposed to. But you tell me this. Suppose, for 1 second, that my grandchild lives in Israel. And suppose I FaceTime them on Friday night so that I can bless them. And I can make Kiddush together with them. And I can wish them a good Shabbos. Wouldn't you say that's within the keeping of the spirit of Shabbat? What we call Shvut? But following the spirit of Shabbat can also result in a stringency. For example, it is technically permissible according to halakha for me, before Shabbat, to go and purchase a movie ticket from the Cavendish Mall there, from the movie theater there on a Friday. Okay? We have an Erev here in the city, in Côte St. Luc, so there's no problem carrying it on Shabbos. And then on Shabbos afternoon, when I've had my shlaf, okay, I can then walk to the movie theater and watch the movie on Shabbat. Didn't handle money, didn't drive. As I said, we have an Erev, so carrying's not an issue. Technically and halakhically, it's 100% permissible. It doesn't violate any of the 39 prohibited malachot. But tell me, in your mind, is that really in the spirit of Shabbat to go and sit in a movie theater on Shabbat afternoon? Of course it isn't. And so what if somebody sits outside on Shabbat and reads the book on their Nook or Kindle? Isn't that 1,000,000 times better than somebody going to the shopping mall on Shabbat afternoon? Isn't that the spirit that we need to have to keep Judaism going? Shouldn't we take advantage of the technologies that we are fortunate to have and use them to foster a new type of Judaism, just like the rabbis did in the 2nd century? Or would we rather continue to live in tents in the desert? You know, one of the challenges for conservative Judaism is that we have a very hard time defining ourselves. We're in the middle. We're not all about personal autonomy, as the Reform is, and we're not all about strictly following halakha, as the Orthodox are. We live in a gray zone, in a fuzzy space, committed to Jewish tradition, yet also engaged with the modern world. Even our rabbis agree It's hard to define conservative Judaism. Conservative Judaism is known as Masorti Judaism, traditional Judaism outside of North America. Only in North America it's called conservative Judaism. One of the websites of the Masorti movement asks, what is Masorti Judaism? And the answer is that it's not an easy question to answer. On their website for the Organization of Conservative Synagogues of the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the page describing conservative Judaism is, we are authentic and dynamic Judaism. Okay. The Orthodox would claim, no, we are authentic. And the Reform claim on their website that they are more dynamic. So once again, we're in the middle, struggling to define ourselves. But then, if you go to the next religion that's closest to Judaism, to Chabad, and you look at their website, Chabad claims to be the most dynamic force in Jewish life today. So who's really dynamic? Apparently everybody claims to be dynamic, and everybody claims to be authentic. I think, and I'm not in business, so I'm not sure, I'm sure we've got people that know far better than I do, but I think we have a marketing problem. We need to speak to people in marketing. We need to overhaul our brand, and because if you have to announce that you are authentic, it indicates a concern that you have that you're not. But one weakness can also be one strength. And since we are in the middle, we are also comfortable drawing on the best of those to the right and those to the left. There are things that we can learn from Chabad. For the one thing, I don't know about you, but it seems to me that Chabad is everywhere. It sometimes feels like if there's a minyan somewhere, you'll find a Chabad. And maybe we should follow that example. Instead of having fewer and bigger synagogue buildings, old buildings that are suffocating us with their upkeep, buildings that were never designed for 21st century Jewish practices, maybe we should be open to branches. Branches in places where Jews are found. Maybe we should bring more programming to places so far away as Dollard and Beaconsfield and Point Claire that have large concentrations of Jews. You know, Chabad makes it very easy to participate. Just show up. Well, Chabad rabbis are certainly not shy about asking for money. I maintain that they have the best vacuum system in the world. They know how to vacuum your pockets before you even get in the door. But they do not have the same pay-to-pray model, which is common among many more traditional congregations, where Jews who only want to come for the high holidays feel that they are unfairly treated when it comes to buying membership or seats. Eventually, that model is going to have to change. Our business model is going to have to change. The younger generation does not join organizations, religious or secular, the same way as the older generation did. And we can also learn from Jewish renewal. And those of you who don't know what Jewish renewal is, it is a group of Judaism that started by the former Chabad Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi. Rabbi Zalman wrote that the true prayer is bursting forth the soul to God. What can be more natural and more human than turning God into a listening presence? Our prayers that we say today. I mean, we've just been through, 3.5 hours of prayer, most of those in Hebrew, very traditional. Love the music, but even though most people here don't understand Hebrew, you are forced to sit in a service for so long in a language that most of you don't understand. So can our prayers really be bursting forth of the soul to God if we don't even know what it is we're saying? Now, naturally, of course, I encourage everyone to learn Hebrew so that you know what you're saying. But it's not only about understanding the words. It's not just about changing what we do. We need space. We need space for spontaneous prayer to share with God whatever is in our heart. Now, the main reason traditional synagogues do not have instrumental music on Shabbat, for example, is because there was music in the temple on Shabbat. And you know what? According to traditional Judaism, we're still mourning for the destruction of the temple that happened over 2,000 years ago. But maybe it's time to get past the mourning for the temple, especially since most of us are not eagerly awaiting the resumption of animal sacrifice. Maybe you are, but I'm not. The caution is that it's all too easy for instrumental music on Shabbat to become like a constant, not a prayer. It's not a simple question. The Reform are also much better at welcoming interfaith families than we are. Montreal is unique, that our intermarriage rate is among the lowest in North America. But we have a lot to learn in how we welcome, we facilitate those families, and I spoke on this a few years ago, you'll probably remember, who are intermarried and who are concerned in raising children Jewish. And that will only happen if we figure out how to make interfaith families feel fully and truly welcome in our shul. Judaism is a religion based in community. We have no hermits. Going off into the wilderness alone to commune with God is not our way. We join together as a community. We join together as family and as friends to celebrate our holidays and our life cycle events. We come together at times of joy and also in times of sorrow. People often express their connection to the Jewish community by joining a synagogue. But as I said, and I want you to hear me carefully, a synagogue is just a building. It is bricks and mortar. The physical infrastructure does not make or define the community more than the Bell Center makes success or failure for the Habs. A community is not defined by the physical space and the professional staff. It is defined by you, the people who come to synagogue, who participate in the community. Having a vibrant, conservative synagogue, community I should say, that connects our souls with God and each other is not something that I as the rabbi can do on my own. We all have to work together. We all need to bring a much more intense energy to our prayers. We all need to serve God, not 1 day, 2 days, 2.5 days a year. We need to engage with our fellow Jews. We need to know who they are. We need to celebrate holidays together. You see, I've got one person that agrees. It's not one that's not sleeping at least. This year, my friends, 5784 needs to be the year wherein conservative Judaism in Montreal breaks out of the old and the fuzzy mold and defines itself for the future. But change and growth as a community begins with growth as an individual. As Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. Tomorrow, I will talk about change on the personal level. In the meantime, on behalf of Elizabeth and the family, I wish you all a Shana Tova u'Mevorechet. Shana Tova. Thank you.